Welcome to another Big Daddy D adventure. Today we've got another project adventure. We are going to be building a lumber rack. I've had lumber just sprawl all over the floor in my shop, including some sideboards for my trailers and some ramps for my trailer, so decided to get it off the floor and save some floor space and put it up on the wall. Well, after looking around online, I found this really simple, cheap lumber rack. It essentially is 2x4s for the verticals and 3/4 inch EMT for the rack parts. And I'm really enjoying my new chopsaw workbench that I put together in the last video. It allowed me to lay out the steel, go ahead and make all the measurements, and then I'm able to just slide it across and cut it to length. Here I'm just using an angle grinder with a flap disc to just clean up the ends from the chop saw. The verticals on this rack are made out of 2x4s. In my case, I had to cut a 2x4 to reach up to that second purlin in my shop. The bottom one and the second one were in plane, but the third one way up at the top was actually set back, so I had to cut a different board and then screw it in to make a junction at that third purlin up there. So now that I got all my boards cut, what I'm doing here is just I grouped all the boards together, made sure they were flush at the end. If you can tell here, I went ahead and made one template just to make sure of my spacing. I went with around 14 inches for my spacing on between those rods that would be holding my lumber. And then I also had to drill holes for the bolts where they bolted into the purlins. And then also I had to drill a hole at the joint where, or at least on the front board, where it was going to screw into that upper section. So before I got started drilling all the holes, what I did is I went ahead and got a piece of angle iron and clamped it up to my vise there. And then I was able to set it up on the center line. So that way, all I had to do was clamp the board to the piece of angle that I had. And then that ensured that I was at center. So then I just had to align it to the bark and start drilling. Now we're gotten to the fun part of this project, drilling all those holes. What I did is on the rods, the 3/4 inch EMT, I went with a 1-inch Forstner bit and I sunk it in about 2.5 inches. And then I also drilled them about a 10-degree angle. That way the rods would point up in the air a little bit and try and keep the material up against the upright. And then on the bolts, what I did is I countersunk them, I guess about 1 inch, based on the size of the washer. I used a Forstner bit. And then on the screw, again, also put a washer on that screw, and then countersunk it about 2 inches. So on the bolts, I was able to drill the countersink over on the drill press, but since it had a center mark on that Forstner bit, I was able to just use my hand drill and then punch out the remaining part of that hole for the bolt with the hand drill. Then I went ahead and did the same thing where those screws are. I went ahead and ran the pilot through that screw board. That way it wouldn't bind up in the board. Now it's time to do the assembly. I went with about a 24-inch on center. And then here what I did is I marked out the purlin, and then I made a little temporary center punch out of a 1/4 inch rod, put a point on it. I was able to hammer it into that purlin, and it made just enough of a mark so I could identify where I needed to drill that hole. What I used was a step bit in my drill, and it drilled a pretty quick hole in that purlin. And what I'm doing here is just temporarily bolting it up against the purlin so I can assess where vertical is when I get up to the top. For the second purlin, again, I'm using another 1/4 inch bolt up here. And it's a little bit of a rinse and repeat that I did at the bottom after I get it leveled. Well, before I get started with the upper section, I'll go ahead and use my impact and tighten up these bolts on the purlins. That way everything's locked in place for the lower section. Then what I'm going to do is go ahead and set those upper pieces, those uprights in on the second tier. They actually sit on that second purlin up there. And then I just use a 3-inch screw that I had countersunk into that lower board about 2 inches. That way I had a really good bite into that back board. Hopefully I feel comfortable that it won't move around whenever I did that. Now we have a bit of rinse and repeat that we did on that second purlin up on that top purlin. What I'm going to do is, again, make sure they're level, then mark them off, identify where I need to drill the hole, and then bolt it up. Now I don't think there's another easier part of doing this rack. All I'm doing is inserting those 3/4 inch EMT into those holes that I drilled into the lumber. Now I've got to the fun part. I've been looking forward to getting these boards off my floor for a long time, especially these trailer side boards. I was able to put them way up at the top because I don't use those very often. I was also really happy that I made my 20-foot steel storage rack and chopsaw station a cart. That way I was able to roll it out of the way and get to those top shelves with my ladder rather than trying to climb onto something to get all the way up there. Well, thanks for coming on another workshop project or adventure with me today. I was able to save a lot of floor space with this simple lumber rack that fit on my wall. I hope you learned something along the way, and as usual, if you like what you saw, give me a thumbs up. And if you'd like to go on more workshop project adventures with me, hit the subscribe button. As always, take care. Bye-bye.